Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Johnson, co-founder and senior partner here at Insight. I'm with my colleague, Josh Suskewicz, who's a partner at Insight, and we are both co-authors of the book together, Lead from the Future, which will be the backdrop or basis for our conversation today on igniting growth with future-backed strategy. Just one housekeeping item, just to mention to everybody, we are recording this session for the next hour. We hope to really have a session that gives you an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So we'll probably take about the first 30 minutes and sort of present some of our thinking here, and then use the other 30 minutes to allow you to have Q&A. So just to start us off, I think our experience in having been doing these things in breakthrough growth arena and disruptive innovation. I co-founded the firm 21 years ago with Clayton Christensen. And, over those 21 years, we've done a lot in trying to help firms reinvent themselves or get beyond their core by being able to develop new innovative products and services and business models. And we often find that they often are one-off efforts, or they're in spite of the organization, not because of it, and they can't repeatedly make it happen, or they don't make it happen at all as it pertains to transformative growth. And in a nutshell, what we think really drives the ability, and it seems so simple, but yet seems so hard for companies to execute on this, is to, number one, think and plan from the future back. Both it's going to be a way of thinking and a way of literally planning, and pretty straightforward of how it sounds, but again, executing on it seems to be another matter. But having that future back lens and view. Second is being relentlessly outside in through what we call the jobs to be done lens. If we could just think about how to inculcate that into our organizations to be more future back, more looking out 5 to 10 years, sort of back past the planning and forecasting, budgeting horizon to what we call the growth horizon, or sometimes referred to as Horizon 3, and really be focused on deeply understanding the consumer, trying to understand what he or she's trying to get done in their life versus that we have the product solution and we just need to add to it and innovate on it. We could be more of this future back and outside in. We find it sets up a much greater probability of success in transformative growth and increases the repeatability, builds the capability for being able to drive disruptive, breakthrough, transformative kinds of innovation for transformative growth. So that's what we want to try to cover, is a little bit on thinking and planning future back and thinking about how to be outside in through jobs to be done. To start on this whole idea of future back, Josh and I, as I mentioned, wrote Lead from the Future about a year and a half ago. In April of 2020, the book came out. Interestingly, the book, as you could imagine, came out, it was published right during the time of COVID. And there were a number of folks who came to us and said, well, sorry that this book came out at just the most unfortunate time, because everybody's going to be hunkered down to dealing with the crisis as opposed to thinking in a visionary way, in a long-term way. And actually, as we thought about what was happening in the crisis, we realized that what individuals needed was, yes, they needed to deal with the situation at hand. They need to be realistic about how to address their business and how to address the nature of things during COVID, but the organization also needed to be able to think how it would be doing things post the COVID crisis. How would it look beyond the 1 or 2 or 3 years, and be able to provide a vision that was basically stable from just the disruption that happened with COVID, that would be inspiring and that would give purpose and direction for the organization. And Josh and I followed from the book an article, just about a month later, entitled "Leaders, Do You Have a Clear Vision for the Post-Crisis Future?" And so, the whole idea of thinking and planning future back actually becomes more important as you are in the middle of trying to navigate a crisis, so that you can be really focused on where where things really need to land for the organization. And I guess the last thing I'd harp on, just in this point is, I think there's a perspective about this whole idea of vision sort of married up with mission. HR groups and other people in executive development and sort of working for the corporation will conduct exercises to either develop or reaffirm a vision statement and a mission statement, and say, we need that to kind of tie to the values of the organization. And I think it gives vision in particular short shrift. Vision should actually tie to strategy. Vision actually should be more than a one-sentence statement. It should really sort of drive a narrative, a way to think about, something much bigger about what the future of the business could look like as a portfolio of businesses. So we want to try to, again, reinforce that in the discussion. And so, just sort of bringing this point about vision and thinking about it even in the context of a crisis. Let me just go back to an oldie but goodie case study, and I imagine some might roll their eyes to see another conversation about Apple, but this part of the Apple story I don't think is as well articulated as it should, and it certainly demonstrates the power of future back better than almost any case study we know. And that is that in the late 90s, Steve Jobs came back from a hiatus from being away from Apple with a clear set of problems. One is the company just wasn't doing well. It just hadn't been managed or sort of led in a way that, that it was really growing and being successful. Second, there was just a general trend in the industry, with commoditization and other forces that were making it difficult for the personal computer to figure out its way. And even the Gateway CEO at the time was saying that it was inevitable that the personal computer was going to be a commodity. And then third was just the whole dot-com crisis and the dot-com bubble that formed, and then the ensuing crisis when the bubble burst. So Steve Jobs and his team were in the middle of literally a crisis. And in January of 2001, in the midst of this set of crises, they decided to look out 10 years and imagine what Apple could and should be, that could leverage its core business of personal computers and the microprocessor within, but also get it to be able to create new areas of growth and go beyond that. And so what came from looking into the future and working backwards was what we would call an adjacency with the digital hub, or what they termed the digital hub strategy when they announced it to the public in 2001, January of 2001, with the idea that with all of the new consumer electronic devices that were coming to the forefront, that Apple could actually help enable or empower these devices, kind of be the brains behind them with the microprocessor and the computer, write elegant software to equip these devices so they didn't have to have a lot of this hardware within them. They could do what they did well, which was really being an application, whether that was an MP3 player or a DVD player or a digital camera. And so they came out and unveiled this digital hub strategy by the combining of software, with the hardware would be the hub for all these consumer electronic devices. And that really became a vision, that was executed pretty quickly to be able to expand beyond their core personal computer business. But they didn't stop there. What they, as we know, did and didn't announce to the world in 2001 was the idea that they could make some of these consumer electronic devices, these products themselves. And of course, the rest is history. It started with the iPod in 2001, that followed with the iTunes Store as a service in 2003, and then the iPhone in 2007, and the iPad in 2010, and on and on. And this became their white space. This is what required business model innovation. It was transformative to the music industry and to telephony. And they did it by being, again, able to envision what was the art of the possible, and not just envision, as I said, products, but business model innovations. You know, the iPod beat all the competition, whether that was Creative or Cabo, or or Rio. You know, these were MP3 players that came out that we've never heard of. They did it by being able to figure out, back to this outside in way, to how to really do something that was simple for the consumer. And it required integrating the iPod with the iTunes service, with software, with even a different revenue model, you know, being able to make money on the iPod and give away the iTunes music for 99 cents a song, but was able to make it super simple. And with the mantra, 1,000 songs in your pocket, really was being able to create success in being able to drive this growth in the white space. But in a nutshell, by being able to look out 10 years and to be able to develop a vision that wasn't just a simple sentence, but actually was a portfolio of their core personal computer business, their adjacent digital hub, and their beyond the core transformative white space set of consumer devices themselves, we're able to walk that back, you know, starting with software development, then the iPod in 2001, to be able to ultimately, you know, drive massive transformation for the company, but also for those industries as well. And it's that part of developing this vision narrative that's a portfolio of businesses and capability that's so powerful, and what would seem so straightforward, but yet for most companies, they're never looking past really 3 years in any way, like the way we're describing Apple. So that's our proposition to all of you: is how do you get your company past saying it's a vision statement and a mission statement to really develop this true vision narrative that's driven by really looking out and being able to figure out, how do you develop these portfolio of businesses? It's an imperative in our work to be able to do that, because without that, you see what we have found over the years you see what we find over the years happens for transformative innovation efforts. If there's no vision, long-term vision and strategy in front of these innovation efforts, these business model innovation efforts, these beyond the core efforts, what happens is either, you know, they're too late to the game. You know, this is sort of the example of Digital Equipment Corporation too late in building its own personal computer to fend off the Apple and Compaqs of the world in the 70s, or too few resources, which was another problem. These new and different efforts just don't have the tailwinds behind it. You know, they either start too late or too few resources. And what's actually more insidious is actually the next two, which is, without this vision in this strategy connected to these breakthrough innovation efforts, there's an impatience for growth. There's no foundational understanding for how long that will take. So if these ventures, these efforts end up, you know, not getting enough traction in terms of real revenue growth early enough, then the plug is pulled on them, you know, for the sake of, you know, we have other things we need to do. Or on the other side, if it actually starts to get success early, then management wants to pour on the gas and thinks it can really drive the overall business unit or company growth, and asks it to get big too fast, too soon, without really having done the proper learning and finding the market development path the right way. And then that very much ties to competition from the core business units, and sustaining their core products and services will continually complain about, you know, these things that are taking resources away from what they're doing, whether those are people or dollars. So the only antidote for all that, that's tied also to rewards and incentives, is to inspire the organization and have them have a view about how vision and strategy could start to inform beyond the core choices that give better rationale for transformative growth initiatives that are driven today. That's why this is so essential, to build this outside-in thinking. So in essence, what we propose is to sustain long-term growth, continued revenue growth, plan for the short term, 90% of what you're going to do, but also put 10% for the long term. And in planning for the long term, it's critical that that long term is first developed through having an actionable vision that brings that long term to life, that then can be translated to strategy, which we'll talk about the relationship between vision and strategy. And through a process where that vision is developed, what we would say in a future back way of thinking, and then literally the whole thing is developed from a future date, which is then walked back in milestone planning in reverse to a set of initiatives that can be developed today. Just on this slide, I just want to make the point that this effort, or this art, if you will, that is not very often utilized, is not very much a part of most corporations and organizations, of spending time in the 5 to 10 years. Yes, there's the threat side. And when you start to look out further than 5 years, you can actually have a conversation about how a set of businesses could actually be in decline. But we find that the more important way that to look at things, and where the imperative is to being able to look out 5 to 10, is to be able to see the opportunities through the convergence of different trends that come together. And Josh is going to talk about a case study of Johnson & Johnson's disease interception that brings this point alive of the convergence of technologies or science and things that, if you can spend some time in the future, you can actually start envisioning what these new opportunities could be to develop beyond the core. And it's interesting that companies in general don't have a good way to measure things that don't exist for the future. They don't have a good way to develop a metric around opportunity cost. They only look at things as they exist today and don't realize, what happens, the lack of investing in something that has yet to happen, or what you could call the opportunity cost. But that's really what is here by being future back oriented, is to be able to identify and seize these opportunities and get them developed as initiatives, as innovation and growth initiatives, by being able to look this way. So the important relationship, as I mentioned, with vision is actually to strategy, as opposed to a vision statement and a mission statement. In fact, we'd say a mission statement or purpose should be imbued in the vision. It should be, what the vision is based on, is a purpose to, in whatever way the corporation wants to make the world a better place. That purpose element is then translated into a vision, and a vision that is these portfolio of the businesses I've talked about. But then vision is executed based on strategy. So if you make a choice in the long term, and you say you define a new game on the left-hand side that develops this destination, think back of this example of this Apple example of the portfolio, then the strategy is the means to get there. It's how do you win the game, whether it's a new game or an existing game. What are the choices that you make over the next couple of years in terms of those business building and capability building initiatives, which is about resource allocation, which is the ultimate of strategy as a definition, is making choice. So, developing those, allocating those resources to those initiatives is the essence of strategy. But here we've tied it specifically to vision. And again, where vision is inspiring the organization, strategy is operationalizing that vision and making it happen. So again, if nothing else, I would hope you take back to the organization, try to tie vision more to strategy than just as a simple exercise up front. And strategy is somehow becomes its own big thing without it having a good connection to the vision that you're trying to develop 5 to 10 years in the first place. That's the definitions that we want to kind of lay out. And, that vision piece, as I mentioned, is how to bring the long-term piece alive. But we have to develop our vision in the right way of thinking, the right mindset, if you will. We love to show this picture of an early train in the 1820s, when locomotive technology brought a whole paradigm shift in transportation. The interesting thing, though, is the first sort of application of a locomotive in envisioning doing transportation in a whole different way was to really not do it in a different way, that they basically took horse-drawn carriages and strung them up behind these steam locomotives. And as you can see, it really wasn't very practical or in fact safe, because folks that were passengers on the top, ended up with smoke and soot in their face. It didn't take long to realize that there was a much better way, that there were greater propellants of possibility given what the technology enabled. This is what we would call present forward thinking, taking the orthodoxies and ways of things are done today with a breakthrough technology or innovation, and not really thinking in a whole clean sheet way of how to do it. And so in developing our vision that's 5 to 10 years out, we just want to be careful to be able to think in a different way, what we would call future back thinking, to make sure that we are generative in considering the art of the possible along the lines of our core, adjacent, and new and different growth businesses as we think about how to develop the future. And it's somewhat of just sort of comparison to present forward thinking, which again, there's nothing wrong with present forward thinking. It's what's important in sustaining the core business and executing and operating. But future back thinking is really more of a learning process of exploration and envisioning. It's about what could be. It's about being able to focus on questions. It's clean sheet thinking. In finance, you'd call it zero-based budgeting. It's being able to think holistically, using the right brain creative side, sort of associated to this design thinking way of doing things. But it's important as we're developing vision that we use future back thinking to make sure that we're not getting impeded by the orthodoxies of today. So with that, we thought we'd bring this alive. I'm going to turn this over to Josh just to talk about a specific case study at J&J, Johnson & Johnson, that really sort of put this way of developing a vision to its fullness, that then was able to be translated to some specific initiatives that are really changing the way things are done at Janssen Pharmaceuticals within the Johnson & Johnson family. Josh, you want to talk about it?
Thank you, Mark. And thanks all for joining today. To just quickly set context for this case, J&J about 5 years ago was in the midst of a very successful run in their pharmaceutical business. They were churning out very innovative new medicines at a pretty good clip. And the leader of their pharmaceutical R&D group, a guy named Dr. Bill Hite, was obviously very pleased with that progress, but also thought that the time had come to put a stake in the ground to build a much more visionary future. And it was based on this notion that we've put on the page here, as Bill thought about what was to come. And if you think about pharmaceutical R&D, they're by definition 5, 8, 10 years in the future, because that's how long it takes to develop their programs. And his concern was that they're developing programs with the assumption that the world around them wouldn't change that much. That the assumptions that they made about the macro environment would largely hold true in the future. And he said, if we think about all the dimensions of change in life sciences, can that really be? That's relevant from the threat side, but it's also relevant on the opportunity side. Do we have the opportunity to do so much more, or to begin to do things fundamentally differently? And he said, so in the not too distant future, we'll all know the diseases that we're susceptible to when we're born, right? We'll be genetically screened. We'll have much better understanding of fundamental risks and susceptibilities. And then society is going to demand interventions. And if you follow that logic through, our healthcare system today is largely reactive, right? We have a problem, we go to the doctor, if we're lucky, we get a good diagnosis, and if we're even luckier, we have a treatment, and then we manage disease. But can we actually shift from a diagnose and treat paradigm to one of predict and preempt, where we intercept disease as it's developing, as opposed to wait for it to manifest and then try to deal with the consequences? So really interesting vision for the future. And what then Bill and his team did was they developed a whole strategy around that initial vision. So they went from vision to strategy, as Mark was talking about earlier, where they thought carefully about what the year 2030 would hold from a healthcare perspective. And remember, this is about 5 years ago. So they thought 10, 12, 15 years into the future. And they said, what's it going to be like when we have all of this biological insight? What's it going to be like when we have all this personalized health information? How will value flow in the healthcare system? What will be possible in terms of product development? And when they put it all together, they said, you know what, we see a role for pharmaceuticals, right? Medicines are going to continue to be very, very important. But we also see the emergence or the prioritization of adjacent solution areas that will be just as important or will be increasingly important versus where they are today. And that was everything on sort of from the high end of cell and gene therapies, where you can infinitely edit cells to impact the body and develop truly personalized solutions, all the way through the different industry categories like always on passive sensors, and that will lead to new ways of diagnosing disease, or digital interventions, right? So this concept of digital therapeutics, where through software-based apps we can actually manage behavior change. And so they came up with a whole portfolio of opportunity areas. And Mark, if you wouldn't mind going to the next page, to go from vision to strategy, what they did is they said, here's what we want to be, 15 years from now in 2030. Here's what we think our core business will deliver as we make adjustments and prepare it for the future. And then here's the bets we can place on these new growth areas that we think will be able to be at size and scale in this 10, 15-year timeframe. And then walked it back to today. So that's the translation from the right-hand side of the page here, the future aspiration back to the near term, and said, okay, we have a couple of programs already that we can accelerate that will help us in these future areas. And then they commissioned a few new programs to fill in gaps in their future state portfolio. So when we talk about going from vision to strategy, what we mean is first build out your vision, like Bill and his teams did, to go from an initial idea, the perspective on the future, to a sort of fully realized animated view of what the future can actually hold, how it's going to work, how industries will evolve, where value will flow, and then what your role will be in it. So what you aspire to create, what you aspire to be in that future state. And then translate that, and this is what we say, planning from the future back, translate that into a vision of your portfolio, if you're working at an enterprise perspective, or if you're working on a specific business unit or product, what will your business unit or product line look like in the future? And lay that out, and then tie it back to where you are today. So reverse engineer it through a series of milestones and developments into a portfolio that you can point to today and say, where have we resourced for the future and where have we not? So what Bill and his teams did was they launched a couple of new initiatives to develop the capabilities and the businesses that they saw as important for the future. And they did that alongside a plan to continue to grow their core business. So that's what we mean by converting vision to strategy. And if we go to the next page, the last thing to underscore here is that the only thing you know about your vision for the future and the plans associated with it is that it's going to be incomplete. There's going to be holes. It's going to be wrong in a couple of ways, right? Nobody has a crystal ball. That's not what we're advocating here. We're not saying, hey, if you guys want to be future oriented, get better at predicting the future. That's a fallacy and can actually be damaging if that's sort of the bar we set. Rather, what we're trying to do is say, lay out a hypothesis for a likely future, and a future that would be exciting, aspirational, inspiring for you and your teams, and then engage in a process of iterative learning, right? So the scientific method, lay out a hypothesis and test the hypothesis and adjust as you go. Because again, no one has a crystal ball, but we all have a sense of where the future is going. And if we carve off the time, if we bring in the right inputs, if we have the right dialogues with our colleagues, we can actually put a pretty good vision together for where we want to go, and then create a strategic plan to get there, and then take an explore, envision, discover mindset, where we are learning as we go, we're adjusting as we go, because again, no one's going to have this perfectly right from the get-go. Let me pause there. I think that covers the content for future back. Mark, you want to jump into jobs to be done, or should we take questions from the line?
Sure, I'll just take a couple minutes because I know we're getting close to the half-hour point, but it'll just take a few more minutes. I think maybe a number of you on the webinar, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think probably a number of you may have followed the jobs to be done approach. But for those that haven't, let me just take a few minutes and then we open up for questions. The outside in piece of it, and thinking when we say jobs to be done, we're talking about really trying to get past product attributes, kind of what do you need this product to do, to really what are you trying to get done in your life. And a real kind of simple example to bring this alive is Intuit's innovation in what they called Quickbooks, for small business owners. And what created it as a transformational breakthrough product was they actually, unlike the other kinds of software that were being provided to small businesses, where basically you needed to be an accountant to really understand how to use it. It was really focused on being a pure accounting software. QuickBooks focused on really what was the job of a small business owner. It was basically, look, I'm a small business owner. I want to focus on my products. I want to focus on, my customers. I'm not an expert on finance. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I definitely don't want to run out of cash. So, he made, Scott Cook and the Intuit team ended up developing a piece of software that was very intuitive, that was really focused on helping a small business owner not run out of cash and make the software very simple to use. You didn't have to be an accountant. And that's what really changed the game, is focusing on what really were people's progress they were trying to get done in their life. And so, we bring up this whole jobs to be done approach, and this idea that Ted Levitt of the Harvard Business School said, people want to buy a 1/4-inch hole. They don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill. It's this focus on developing the why versus the what, and focusing on what really people want, kind of this 5 whys approach. Like, why are they going to buy this solution? What is it really that is the progress they're trying to make in their life? And understanding that there is functional, emotional, and social elements of being able to figure that out. All of this is under on the consideration set for how to get these transformative innovations. Because if you can get to this depth of understanding, what really is this progress that somebody's trying to do? Like the Apple example of why did the Apple iPod beat out Creative and Rio and all of these other different MP3 players. It's because they fulfilled the job to be done, which is help me to have a seamless music experience, help it make it super easy for me to download music to my device. And they really understood the social and emotional elements as well. If you can get to that kind of depth, and then the last bit of here is know which ones are not only important, but poorly satisfied to date, you have an opportunity to be able to prioritize, which then can lead to solutions. And it ties to the future back piece, because at Innosight, when we spend time helping clients, when we look into the future, we really try to zero in on, from a consumer or customer point of view, what are going to be those jobs 5 to 10 years from now that are going to be not only important, but unsatisfied and of high value, that tie to what we call strategic opportunity areas. That's the real power of putting together future back with outside in, is being able to anticipate 5 years from now where value with the customer is really going to go, and how you can start planting the seeds of initiatives today. So with that, I know we're at time. We're going to open this up to questions for the next 25 minutes or about. But I just remind everyone, we had a few more things to share, but I think questions and answers and having this discussion are going to be better, especially it's not too big a group. But again, just remember the key that we have found in the last 20 years of success of being able to drive disruptive, breakthrough, other forms of innovation that drive transformative growth is to just start with the mindset that part of the time of any leadership and innovation group is going to be thinking and planning future back, and that there's a relentless focus on being outside in through jobs to be done. So that I will open it up for Q&A, and Meredith, maybe you can help us facilitate the Q&A here. And if you can't, then if it's not working in the sort of the facilitator mode, just go ahead and put your questions into the chat box, and we can try to answer it directly from there.
Looks like we have a question from Barry. Are there other examples of recent future-back brand successes? Mark, want to start with that?
Sure. Well, I think as far as unfortunately, these are the common examples, but that just shows, I think, the endemic problem with senior management. The other future-back brand success would be, in fact, I can show it because we're going to, it's often the same cited ones, but it's a limited set outside of these. But Amazon has been very deliberate in basically saying, and this is through the leadership of Jeff Bezos, of course, it says we always constantly look out to the 7-year horizon because there's very little competition. And of course, we know Jeff Bezos has talked about being super relentless on customer understanding and customer service. But Amazon has been built to transform both by being future back. All of these ideas, like, for example, it started with books, of course, through being able to think of it as sort of the, kind of the facilitated exchange and being able to broker between suppliers and buyers in doing that online. But it quickly moved in 2006 to Amazon Web Services, and they had envisioned that well before they actually developed the web services that started, for being able to help small business owners, sort of being able to provide, that foundation for them being able to do e-commerce and to have business on the internet. And that ability, was to envision it and to execute on it, even when, Business Week, for example, had a cover article that was saying that Jeff Bezos and team just couldn't, as they put it, mind the store. But anyway, that would be, I think, another big example of sort of branded success of being both future back and outside in.
Yeah, that's an iconic example. We have another question from Kay. So when you're future back, is there a fuzziness to jobs to be done? And does jobs to be done focus keep people focused on the today? Okay, I think that's a great question. Mark, I'd love your thoughts too. Maybe I'll just start off.
Sure, go ahead.
The Clay Christensen, the Insight's co-founder with Mark, and of course also the sort of the father of jobs to be done theory, along with disruption theory. He used to say that one of the things that's so special about a jobs to be done approach is that when you look at the jobs to be done, they're actually pretty steady over time. So circumstances shift, but the fundamental underlying needs, the sort of the driving desires that people have, are relatively stable, right? So a simple example that Clay used to talk about a lot was, way back in the days of the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar needed to get a message to his, from the front all the way back to Rome. And the means available to him in those days were one thing. Today, we put a FedEx envelope in the mail, but the job to be done can be relatively similar. And it's a really good push, Kay. I think when we do jobs to be done work in a future back context, there's always a challenge of kind of getting the level of granularity right. You want these themes of, back to the J&J example, right? We're going to be intercepting disease, and what jobs to be done does that imply? Well, it implies that, we need to help people understand what their level of risk really is, and when susceptibility crosses into risk, and things like that. So you have jobs at sort of a meta level, which is a little bit different than the very specific product definition choices that jobs to be done can drive as well. But if you keep it at that sort of at that thematic level, then you can avoid over focus on today. And in fact, it's probably one of the best tools to get away from the today and to think carefully about what the best possible future could be, what a future could be that's agnostic to, to what exists today.
Yeah, one thing I'd add, Josh, to what you're saying, I mean, this question sparks another thought. We both have experienced it, is that a lot of the reason that, sort of looking at jobs to be done in the future, or future back in general, or just the time horizon of the 5 to 10 years, is a view that it's just not doable. It's crystal balling. Nobody can predict the future. And I'm keying off the word fuzziness, because that's a good way to look at it. Is, we often say, when you develop that perspective of jobs of the future, what are going to be the important and satisfied ones, or that portfolio, of core adjacent potential businesses, it's fuzzy. But that's okay. We're trying to create what we would call an impressionist painting, as opposed to a photograph. But having done this for so many years, you see the power of what that impressionist painting can do. It provides that direction and alignment. It begins those conversations to evolve a point of view and insight, that kind of comes from the foresight. For example, we worked in the automotive industry for a top of the house, kind of the top team of an American OEM. And, they kind of went into thinking about the future with the notion that they're not going to be ahead on battery technology or battery electric vehicles, because people didn't want them, and that they would just be a fast follower. As they developed their point of view and worked the jobs to be done of the future, and where technology was going, and just a whole set of different factors, they created some clarity. They didn't get certainty, but they got, as a team, clarity that completely changed their mind and said, holy cow, we need to actually be investing now in battery technology and battery electric vehicles, and really started to put that into the portfolio. So that fuzziness has to be embraced as a part of what you're trying to do, which is a different mindset, which is building clarity as opposed to certainty.
That's a great point and a great example. Next question comes from Javier. So typically, how long does it take to have a first draft of a future-backed strategy so that the C-level has a shared view of the future? Great question. So just pragmatically, when we typically scope these things out, there'd be a lot of factors to consider, the size and scope of the organization, bandwidth of the organization, and so on and so forth. But as a rule of thumb, we'd say minimum 3 months, maximum 6 months. That's usually the sweet spot. You can do like a 3-day offsite and have a first pass at this with the C-suite. But to give it the soak time to do some analyses, to really bring people along, we typically plan these as 3 to 6 month exercises.
Yeah, and one other thing to add about future back vision and strategy, it's absolutely right to think of it as a first draft. And we often talk about companies that have been very present forward and they haven't really spent any time in the future, that this is, we would call, quote unquote, a heavy lift to do the work of developing the trends that are going to matter, that then get to converge to a point of inflection. Sort of the example that Josh shared about disease interception with Janssen Pharmaceuticals of J&J. But looking at those jobs that are going to be important and unmet in the context of those trends, even looking at the overall ecosystem and how that changes, that takes a lot of work to sort of, in the first dialogue, develop that, and then come up with that Apple equivalent of, what's the literal future state in terms of a portfolio of core, adjacent, and new and different businesses and capabilities, and then take that and walk that back to milestones, which then lead to a portfolio of today of initiatives, core and new, that get funded, and then a roadmap to make that happen. So that does take time, and it will take a lot of time in the beginning to kind of do that. But then you're never one and done with this, as I think, again, Josh, you pointed it out earlier. We almost call it now a strategic management system that's needed in this day and age, where in the 21st century, where you're constantly coming back to that vision and the work that you've done every, say, couple months as a team for a day, every 3 months or whatever is the right cadence. You're constantly reviewing, of course, the initiatives, and the initiatives that assumptions aren't proving true are being slowed down or stopped. And, you're sort of adjusting the portfolio. So it's this evolution, it's this shaping of, of, of the portfolio of core and new growth initiatives that were informed by that vision. And it's shaping the vision as well, as you go forward in time and as you evolve your point of view. And as another automotive example, BMW does their own sort of look into the future and understand the implications of what autonomy and connectivity and just general full electrification that could happen in 20 years from now. And then, of course, disruptive business models like Uber and Lyft. What does that all mean to them as a company? And they're spending time to think about that, independent of the day-to-day execute and operate on an every 3 month or so basis. So it's really key to, as you said, you get the first draft, but then you're never one and done with it, that you really create a system of continual future environment monitoring, staying future ready, and incorporating that as a part of what leadership and innovation teams do. It'd still be 90% operate and execute, but this 10% of focusing on the future and bringing it alive through future back is critical to being able to continually shape and evolve the organization.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Let's see, one last call. Any other questions from the group?
All right, it looks like we have fully tapped all the questions. Well, we really appreciate then, if there are no more questions, everybody's coming to the webinar and your participation, and I hope that we've been helpful in some form or fashion with this, what we would call developing the mindset as the first way to think about this is, how do you just start developing this mindset or a common language about vision and strategy? And then how do you from there, sort of build from that. And by the way, it looks like we have another question here. So we'll go for that other question here. So what do you see as the role of the board? Well, that's another great question. And we actually wrote about that in Lead from the Future. There's a role for the leadership team, so it's not just the innovation team that's sort of looking in the future and trying to create the breakthrough growth. But this is all around, how does the leadership team begin to engage in that learning process that Josh shared in terms of that circle of explore, envision, and discover. But the board should have absolutely a role in this process, because they should be able to be informed about the assumptions that come out of being able to look into the future and its implications. And, their role is to be able to, of course, create good governance of the organization, but they also have to be good stewards of the business. Leadership teams can come and go. There can be some instability, if you will, when you think over a 5 to 10 year horizon, but boards oftentimes have people that have been on it for a very long time. They're supposed to have a longer term view. So as a tangible way of talking about the role of boards, including them in conversation, whether that's directly in some of these strategic dialogues or just having separate conversations with individual board members to get their perspective about the future and its implications, based on the work and how resources should be allocated to the future beyond the core, just given their breadth of experience and the whole point that they should have a strategic mindset, at least some of them, as well as just having a mindset to be good stewards of the business for the long term. The answer is they absolutely should play a role. They should be given the language of future back. And like I said, they should be, kept engaged in the process in a proper way so that they can be briefed and they can actually have influence. And Josh, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that's well said. They need to reinforce. So first of all, shape and then reinforce the strategy as part of their supervisory role.
Yep. Okay. Um, well, again, certainly hope we have 10 minutes left if anybody wants to quickly get in another question, but really appreciate, these were excellent questions. Really appreciate everybody's time and participation. And as I said, if we can start with just sort of building this language about what it means to be future back and outside in, we think this will go a huge way. Just if you say it enough times, if you talk this language enough times, believe it or not, this will help a lot in sort of getting the right mindset, which then leads to the right skill set and the right tool set to be able to give breakthrough innovation efforts a much higher probability of long-term success. So appreciate everybody's attention. And Josh, I will actually leave it to you for last words.
I'll just echo that. Thank you all, and hope you found this useful.
Okay, appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.